This video was brought to you by Brilliant. Disney is struggling right now. Their share price continues to fall, about 20% in the last year, and Disney Plus is continuing to bleed out hundreds of millions of dollars each and every quarter. But why? Well, according to you, the reason for all of this suffering is that Disney got woke. No, really. Last week, we released a video explaining that essentially all of Disney's business units were underperforming to one level or another. I told you that their TV business was suffering as a result of falling ad sales and cord cutting. Their movies were failing to pull in audiences in movie theaters. Their streaming service was hemorrhaging capital and burning out audiences. And their parks, while profitable, were living on borrowed time. It seems, though, that many of you had another fifth reason in mind for why Disney was struggling, with literally hundreds of you suggesting that the real reason Disney was suffering was because they'd gone woke. And this is a popular theory on the internet at the moment. The idea that corporations going woke is turning off customers and resulting in declining profitability. For instance, we've seen companies like Bud Light, who, after working with trans influencer Dylan Mulvaney, were punished for their progressive marketing practices, with the brand falling from the top spot in the US beer market and their owner, AB InBev, suffering from a stock price slump after just one Instagram post. But is the same thing really happening in the media? Well, we ran the maths. We surveyed thousands of TLDR viewers from across the political spectrum to find the most woke movies, and then discover if this quote-unquote wokeness is really damaging their performance, both critically and financially. So let's run through the maths on Go Woke, Go Broke once and for all. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. Okay, before we get into the whole woke thing, let's take a look at Disney's latest slate of movies and explain why this conversation is even happening. Ultimately, this discussion has emerged because Disney's movies aren't doing all that well at the moment. In the last year, Disney released Strange World, The Little Mermaid, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, and The Haunted Mansion in theaters. And literally all of these movies underperformed, with Strange World actually losing money at the box office, The Little Mermaid making a more modest profit than Disney had hoped for, especially when you account for additional marketing costs, Indiana Jones also performing versus expectations, and The Haunted Mansion off to a pretty rough start in its opening weekend. Simultaneously, releases from Pixar like Lightyear and Elemental have also massively underperformed. Lightyear barely made back its budget, even without marketing costs, and Elemental also fell far short of expectations. The powerhouse that is Marvel has also struggled more than usual. Black Panther and Guardians are certainly bright spots for the studio, both raking in nearly $1 billion, but Ant-Man struggled to make back much more than its budget. Now, the accusation here is that moviegoers are just avoiding these movies because they have woke themes. That's things like Disney's first major LGBTQ+ character in Strange World, the brief queer kiss in Lightyear, and the so-called race swapping that took place in The Little Mermaid. Proponents of this theory argue that things like this are putting off families and conservatives who object to these kinds of progressive and liberal messages. The thing is, what is woke? Well, it's traditionally been defined as someone who's alert and concerned about social injustice and discrimination. But to determine how this actually applies to cinema, we scoured Reddit and Quora conversations to find the most frequently cited reasons for wokeness. And from this, we put together a list of factors which could be accused of making a movie woke. With this in hand, we put out a survey where we asked thousands of TLDR viewers if they thought these features really made a movie more woke. And having crunched this data, there are 7 things which make a movie more woke. And they are the discussion of trans issues, male privilege and white privilege, race swapping and gender swapping, and the discussion of issues related to sexual orientation and toxic masculinity. Although, if you filter for just those who self-identify as right-wing, that order does change a little. So, with these factors in mind, and with a slightly clearer definition of what makes cinema woke, which movies are actually the wokest? And does Disney really produce most of them? Well, to find out, we pulled together a list of the 60 most recent releases from Disney Studios, as well as from Universal, Warner Brothers, and the Mouse's animation rivals over at DreamWorks. A list of movies which looks like this. Now, to assess their perceived wokeness, we asked survey respondents to tell us how woke they thought these movies really were, allowing them to also skip movies that they weren't familiar enough with to make a true judgment. Now, using these numbers and using this equation more specifically, we created the TLDR Wokeness Index. It's not really a trademark, it just looks more fun that way. This index, which produces scores between positive and negative 200, gives us an indication of how woke each movie is determined to be by the thousands of people who took this survey. The question being, which are the wokest movies on the list? Well, the top 10 according to you are Turning Red, Mulan, Strange World, Lightyear, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, Black Panther 2, The Rise of Skywalker, The Last Jedi, Barbie, and The Little Mermaid. On the other end of the spectrum, though, movies like Spider-Man No Way Home, the Super Mario movie, Cocaine Bear, Puss in Boots, The Last Wish, and Oppenheimer make up the bottom of our list. All in all, our survey respondents placed all of the movies in this order. From this, we can now determine if Disney Studios did produce most of these woke movies, as the Go Woke, Go Broke mantra would suggest. So, if we take a look at the studios behind these movies, we can see that Disney does seem to fall at the upper end more frequently, with movies produced by Disney getting an average wokeness index of 9.6. Star Wars getting a 1.1, and then Warner Brothers picking up a negative 15.08. According to our voters, Universal is the least woke studio surveyed, with a wokeness index of negative 42.4. So it seems that our audience do broadly agree with the idea that Disney's movies are the wokest out of the studios surveyed. But does this really explain their recent decline in box office results? As I said in the intro, Disney certainly has struggled in the box office recently, seeing more than a few movies coming in under expectations. So let's see whether this has anything to do with wokeness. Let me introduce you to our scatter charts. On this one, the x-axis shows the perceived wokeness of the movies, while the y-axis shows the average ranking the movie got on Rotten Tomatoes. And these data points now show us that while the highest rated movies do tend to be on the less woke end of the spectrum, there's very little correlation between the wokeness of a film and its overall quality according to critics and audiences. Now, there is a slight downward trend here, but with an R-squared value of 0.03, it's an incredibly weak correlation that falls way below the standard needed to be statistically significant. Now, if we adjust this chart a little and only look at audience scores, that is, to ignore the critics, the trend does become slightly clearer at 0.072, but it's still not a statistically significant enough trend to draw any real conclusions from. So, at least according to our wokeness index, there's essentially no correlation between the wokeness score and how much audiences and critics like movies. And while audiences do seem very slightly less keen on woke movies, that this could be attributed to people review bombing movies that they haven't even seen. And regardless, the data is truly not statistically significant enough to really draw a correlation from. But what about money? After all, the claim is go woke, go broke, not go woke, get poor Rotten Tomatoes scores. Well, this time, let's change the y-axis to show how much money each movie made at the box office, ignoring for the moment the money that they made through other sources like streaming. Here though, the data is even weaker. According to our statistical analysis, there's quite literally no correlation here. The trend line is basically dead straight, and with an R-squared value of 0, the lowest possible score, we're safe to say that there's no correlation at all. Now, to be fair, while the Disney movies do appear disproportionately frequently on the right-hand side of this chart, that is to say, the woker side, they're also spread all over the financial spectrum, from The Force Awakens at the top to Strange Worlds, Mulan, and Turning Red towards the bottom. Also, to be fair to Disney, a lot of these more woke Disney productions do also earn a lot more money than the less woke movies released by other studios. Now, it's worth noting that when you filter these results to only include those who identify themselves on the political right, this does shift. Not only do they, perhaps unsurprisingly, rank more movies as woke, they do also shift the trend line downwards a little. Although with an R-squared value of 0.03, it's by no means statistically significant. So does this prove that the idea of go woke, go broke is untrue? Well, I definitely wouldn't make that argument. Our survey and data are relatively rudimental, and our analysis is limited by the constraints of this video. However, from the data we have, it does seem that any strong correlation between movie studios going woke and losing money seems pretty unfounded. So if that's true, then what's really going on at Disney? The first and most obvious problem when it comes to Disney's movies isn't wokeness. It's just plain bad storytelling. Disney has demonstrated a remarkable lack of creativity in recent years, which has certainly blunted the impact of their movies and storytelling. When people are constantly offered fresh and unique approaches, not just by other movie studios, but also by social media and streaming, it's understandable that people might not head out to the movie theater to see a rehashed Little Mermaid, regardless of who's cast in the lead role. Bad marketing is clearly also an issue here too. Movies like Elemental and Strange Worlds suffered not necessarily because they were woke, but because they were massively underpromoted. In fact, we know that Strange Worlds had its budget slashed in order to promote other Disney properties, like the broadly successful Black Panther. So this total lack of awareness might have more to do with its failure than the fact that one of its characters happens to be gay. And even if movie studios do make good movies and market them well, we're just seeing structural decline in the industry. The latest entries in the Mission Impossible and Fast and Furious franchises have both underperformed expectations. Neither suffered because they were woke. Both largely struggled because people just don't go to the theater in the same way that they did in years gone by. Wokeness then looks like a pretty flimsy excuse to justify why these movies are underperforming across the board. You might think, perhaps correctly, that movies are getting more woke. But it seems that just because some people are offended by transgender characters, the discussion of race, or a kiss between same-sex characters, this just doesn't seem to be widespread enough to really push down box office earnings. The thing is, though, that this power isn't distributed perfectly between markets. Bud Light fell off so hard because it appealed specifically to an audience which are more likely to buy into the go woke, go broke narrative and boycott brands that go against their politics. But the same isn't true of all industries. Just take a look at the movie industry, and more specifically the runaway success of Barbie, one of the most woke movies on our list. It might have been widely bemoaned by conservative media, but ultimately they don't hold as much power in this industry as they might think. And while pushback from conservatives certainly can make some impact, it's just not as big as the impact felt by making bad movies, marketing them poorly, and the decline of the box office more generally. As I say, the analysis and data in this video aren't perfect, but the trends do seem to hold up. And we were able to do that analysis and find those trends thanks to Brilliant.org. They're the STEM learning platform full of all kinds of courses which can help with improving your career and your understanding of the world. For instance, their hypothesis testing course allows us to better analyze claims and test our own assumptions and theories. Or the Predicting with Probability course helps us to better understand projections and forecasts, allowing us to identify when there's something weird going on with official projections. It's not just statistics though. The interactive and engaging courses over on Brilliant take you through all kinds of important topics, from the worlds of maths, data science, and computer science. Brilliant have also been a long-time supporter of the channel, so if you ever considered checking them out, we'd really appreciate it if you used our link. That way, they'll continue to support the channel. And perhaps more importantly for you, the first 200 people to click the link will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. Thanks for watching, and thanks to Brilliant for supporting TLDR.